Good morning. I'm Nicole. This is the Trust Effect, and I'm so happy you're here with me today. So, for those of you joining live, good morning, welcome. If you happen to be tuning in after the fact on Substack or on YouTube, thank you so much for being here. And if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, do all of the social media things, because it is what helps ensure this work gets widely distributed. And I think we talk about some important things on here. Um, Maybe a little unusual, maybe not what you're used to hearing on the majority of platforms or in mainstream, but important nonetheless, because at the end of the day, if you've never been here before, we talk about all things trust, and not trust as a feeling, but trust as a structure, something that you can look at, that you can measure both within yourself, within the world around you, and begin to make better decisions about how you choose to show up and participate with yourself, with your family, with your friends, in your workplace, in your community, and how that ripples into the institutions that we believe govern our day-to-day life and experiences. And this is, I think, in 2026, maybe one of the most important things you can learn how to do, which is learn how to trust from the inside out, to be able to identify the structures of trust so that you no longer have to rely on what people are saying, and that you can actually begin to pay attention to the actions under the words and look for the alignment and the congruence between the two. Which brings me to what I'd like to talk about today, because I, for the past few days, have just been hearing the phrase only move as fast as you can stay aligned. Only move as fast as you can stay aligned. And if you've been here for the past few months, you know that I've developed an ecosystem called Sovran Wellth. And the intention of Sovran Wellth is for you to learn how to perceive the world around you differently, to be able to witness your life, witness what's happening around you from a place of neutrality, widen your perspective and perception of what's happening so that you can start holding more truths at once, right? We don't really believe in binaries around here. We look at everything as yes and. It's not either or, yes, no, black, white. We work on a spectrum where there is yes and. Yes, this could be true, this could be true, this could be true. And then you get to make a choice, right? Because we can only ever say yes to one thing. And a yes to something is a no to a bunch of other things. And from that decision, you end up with a series of consequences, which, if you go back 3 episodes, we did an episode on honesty, consequence, and compensation. So, what happens when you start really embodying radical levels of honesty and you allow that honesty to begin to dictate your actions, right? And the consequences that flow from that, positive or negative. Again, everything is neutral, but every decision has an effect, right? Every cause has an effect, and each effect can be viewed as a consequence. And so when we're looking at only moving as fast as you can stay aligned, what does that actually mean, right? Because at the end of the day, Sovran Wellth is not only a capacity management tool, it's also an alignment tool. It allows you to look at the 9 capacities, the 9 fields of your life, and really begin to identify where you have exceeded your capacity in certain areas, where you're not utilizing, where you have no capacity in other areas that maybe need to be strengthened. And a lot of that comes down to alignment, right? And whether or not you are operating from a place of self-abandonment and self-betrayal, or if you're staying aligned enough to be able to make decisions that are in your highest and best good. And not only for you, but for the people around you. But to be able to do that, again, not from a place of self-betrayal, because we can be doing things for ourselves that we believe are best for everyone around us. But what's best for everyone around us is that we remain in a state, in a consistent state of self-betrayal and self-abandonment. And you don't have to look much further than our institutions, corporations, governments, etc., to understand that self-betrayal and self-abandonment is their currency. They can't operate the way they do without consistent levels of self-abandonment, and not just from society, not just from the people we believe they govern, but from the people inside of those institutions that make the decisions every day. Because as I've said before, and I have multiple articles on my Substack, which again, if you're listening on another platform, I'm on Substack under the Wealthy Sovran. Governments and corporations are just legal fictions. They're just pieces of paper, right? They're just forms that must be animated, must come to life, must be executed through the participation of the humans inside of them. And so if the people inside of those organizations are in a constant state of self-abandonment, self-betrayal, choosing to stay more loyal to a lie than they are the truth, this is how we get the systems that we have. And there is no magical fix. There is no external sweeping force that's going to come in and correct these spaces, because even basic physics will tell you, like, if you exert X amount of pressure onto something, it's going to push back with twice as much. It has to change from the inside out. It has to bubble up from the inside out, which is why everything we do around here on the Trust Effect focuses on your participation, and your participation through the lens of the structure of trust. Because again, when you can trust yourself and you can trust in what you're seeing outside of you, you can trust your perception, you can trust your ability to question what you're seeing, to hold more than one truth, to hold multiple perspectives, and to then begin to align yourself with what feels most true for you, what aligns with your integrity and your value system. And then you get to make those decisions and watch the ripple and the consequences of those, which can be absolutely beautiful. It can be so beautiful. And so, in standard fashion, before I jump into what exactly I mean when I say only move as fast as you can stay aligned, I'm going to read you this week's Daily Sovran. So the Daily Sovran is just a daily seasonal devotional that I wrote to help you learn how to witness your life, right? To be able to take a beat, take a breath, stand back, read something and go, oh, I can see or I can feel how this might apply to me, how it shows up in my life. And again, it's based on the 4 seasons. It's not based on a Gregorian calendar. It's not based on the days of the week. It's based on the 4 seasons, on the premise that we have 13 weeks for every season. And so I intentionally did it that way because while you may be in a physical season of summer, like I am here in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, you may actually be in the winter of your life. And what you need to see and what you need to witness could be very different, right? Or hemispherically, you may be in a southern hemisphere and it actually is your winter. So I wanted to make this accessible for everyone. And what I intentionally did was every week, so again, 4 seasons, 13 weeks, every week has its own theme. And those themes appear through every season. So you get to see them through the energies of that season. So the theme this week actually is consequence, which is interesting because we did do an episode, like I said, I think it was episode 12, 13. I don't remember. It's honesty, consequence, and compensation. We already talked about consequence, but last week was actually action. We were talking about action last week. And so it's only natural that once you take action on something, you are going to start to feel the ripple of the consequences that are before you. So we are week 9, which is crazy. Again, we're closer to fall than we are to spring at this point. Week 9, day 3 of summer. And today is inner harvest. Not everything you're living today was made today. Some of it was planted long before you knew what it would become. A pattern repeated often enough, a boundary ignored once too often, a tenderness kept alive through small faithful acts no one else would have noticed. What grows now may have begun quietly, almost invisibly, in another season of your life. This is one of the most humbling truths of consequence. You do not only inherit what others have done, you inherit yourself, your own repetition, your own devotion, your own refusal, your own way of staying, turning away, holding back, or moving closer. And still there's mercy in this, because if today is shaped by what has already been planted, then tomorrow's being shaped by what you're planting now. The field's not cruel, but it is responsive, and it always gives form to what you feed. So pay attention to what you keep sowing with your words, your attention, your pace, your promises, your silence. Because today you're standing in the early edge of your future. I like that. I like that. I think that's a beautiful reminder of the importance of being present, the importance of staying in your body as much as possible. Because I think one of the biggest detriments we have as humans and in our society and the way we've been conditioned is that we spend so much time either attached to the records of the past. I've talked about this before, recorded history, what we keep reattaching to. I think of record as cord. You can think of it as like a physical chord or a chord, chord, like a note, a resonance, something that we come into alignment with. And we can either become really attached to the records of our past, be it the things that we've experienced, the people we knew, the person we used to be, or even further than that, recorded history, the records of events that we never personally witnessed, we never personally experienced, but the constant retelling of those stories has shaped our present day. And not only has it shaped our present day, when we start getting into the interesting dynamics of epigenetics, which is how our environment impacts our genes and what kind of turns on and turns off. And if you want to know more about that, talked about it in a past episode, but Dr. Bruce Lipton is the kind of the father of epigenetics, and he goes into fascinating stories about how that impacts our body. But it also gives us with an inherited record as well, and responses and reactions that we may be having to our environment that aren't actually ours, right? They've come through us, because as I've said this before, as a woman, you were born with all of the eggs you will ever have. You have those eggs within you when you were in utero in your mother. So think about that holographically and how that works, where you're technically inside of your grandmother, who was inside of her grandmother, who was inside of her grandmother. And you're now getting the imprints of her experiences. Her life experiences have been imprinted on you in a very meaningful and genetic way. And so as we become more aware of this and we gain greater perspective on maybe why we are the way we are and where we came from and what's actually true in the present moment, what's in front of us, it can really begin to shift how we perceive ourselves and who we actually are and what we're choosing to be faithful and true to, right? This is why HALT which is the foundation of the witness inside of Sovran Wellth, HALT, being honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust. Why it's so important, why honesty is a foundational capacity that we have to be able to build. Because when you can't be honest about what's in front of you, and you can't accept who you are in this moment, who you are being, not who you're telling the world you are, who you're being, and you can't accept how you got here, and you want to remain in denial, well then how do you start building loyalty to yourself? How do you stop being loyal to perhaps the dishonesty, the lies that you tell yourself? Because if you're always going to be loyal to a lie instead of the truth, you're never going to trust yourself, not fully. You'll never trust yourself to make a good decision. You'll never trust yourself to be able to choose what is best for you, to put yourself in the experiences and the situations and the relationships that best serve you, right? Honesty is a foundational pillar, but we tend to rush things too much, right? This is where we get into what I've been ruminating on for the past few days, which is only moving as fast as you can stay aligned, right? We tend to have this urgency through which we live our life because we live also, I'm talking a lot about recorded history in the past and the things we attach to behind us. But if we're not attaching to things behind us, we're projecting into the future and we're living in our potential. And potential is beautiful. We need to have vision. We need to be able to have a vision for our future that we want to move towards. But a future cannot be sustained or maintained if you ignore the present capacity that you have to be able to not only achieve it, but to hold it, maintain it, sustain it, be in that future vision of yourself. And if that future vision of yourself requires that you stop lying to yourself and accept how you got to where you're at so that you can start building loyalty to yourself every day so that you can learn to trust yourself. See where I'm going with that? It becomes really deep and meaningful work that is required of all of us all the time. And one of the reasons why this kind of hit my radar is, or why I thought it was actually important to talk about today, is because a colleague of mine, I guess you can call him a colleague, fellow content creator, sent me an article yesterday, and it was about Tim Houston. And Tim Houston said, where is he here? I have it, promise. Tim Houston said he was doing a, you may have heard it if you live here or even if you live anywhere in Canada. He's been doing these tours around the province and visiting all of the various chambers of commerce. If you've heard anything, you probably heard the events in Wolfville where it didn't go so well. Protesters weren't very happy. But he just wrapped it up, and his 7th tour. And during his speech at a chamber, I'm just going to read it. During his speech at a Chamber of Commerce event last month in Yarmouth, Premier Tim Houston mentioned that on account of his business background, which I've talked a lot about in previous episodes, his experience working in offshore finance, which is the world I come from, so I'm kind of familiar with the personalities that are attracted to that space, shall we say. That on account of his business background and team around him, he can make 99 decisions in the time it takes someone else to make 5. But if you make, and a quote from him, but if you make 99 decisions in the time somebody else may make 5, you have to accept that they're not all going to be perfect. And you have to have the courage to say, we got that one wrong. And we've done that a lot as well, maybe too much. I don't know what he means by that. And I'm not going to pretend to know what he means by we've done that a lot as well, maybe too much. I don't know if he's talking about I've made too many decisions that have gone haywire, maybe too many times, or I've apologized too much. It's an ambiguous quote. I don't actually know what he means by that. But I thought it was really interesting because on January 29th, I had a conversation with Mayor Fillmore live on the radio. And I actually have a clip of it on my Substack. If you go to the Trust Effect and look at the article, Here's Something, Say Something, I have a list of my clips there. And on January 29th, I was talking to Mayor Fillmore about some of the decisions that they're making, specifically around our capital budget, which if you've hung around here for a while, you know that post capital budget being released, there was an audit by the HRM auditor indicating that there's $380 million that can't be accounted for. But during that call, when I was asking about the budgets and the line items that we don't talk about, specifically about how litigious the HRM is and how much they actually spend in legal fees attempting to not follow their own processes or have to defend themselves from the fact that they didn't follow their own processes, and what that looks like on the budget. Like, what does that actual line item look like on our budget? How much are we spending? He didn't really answer the question, and God love the host, Dan. He really pushed back on Mayor Fillmore and was like, well, we need to talk about this. Like, where's the money going? Are we spending too much on lawyers? And again, kind of skirted the question by saying, well, I'm able to make decisions really quickly. He cited Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, where he talks about how you need 10,000 hours experience to really kind of call yourself an expert. And well, I have 100,000 hours, so I'm able to make decisions faster than other people. So now I'm starting to see like this executive dysfunctional pattern showing up in the people that are choosing to lead our municipalities and our province, where they believe that they can make decisions faster. And because they can make decisions faster, that they are perhaps more, what's the word I'm looking for, capable. And that's just simply not true. That's just simply not true. A fast decision isn't a well-considered decision. And we already have a history right now of Premier Houston absolutely stating on the record in response to an audit of the Nova Scotia Health Authority, where there were almost $4 billion with a B dollars spent outside of procurement guidelines, that he prefers progress over process, which I would expect again from someone who believes that they can make 99 decisions for every 5 that normal people make. And then in the same breath say, well, not every one of them are good, and sometimes we have to apologize. Like, my God, what is happening, right? And when you believe that you have, I think, enough experience to make decisions quickly while also stating and having a track record of operating outside of procurement guidelines, which again, mayor currently under investigation for not following procurement guidelines, premier getting railed by the auditor general on a regular basis for not following procurement guidelines, while both saying that they're capable of making fast decisions. We have a problem. We have a problem. And this is why I constantly want people to stop listening to words and paying attention to actions. Because they are moving faster than they can stay aligned inside of their governing principles, inside of their governing documents, right? This is why, if you've been around here, we have the 4 conditions, right? The 4 conditions of trust. This is what I have determined is the formula for trust. And it's not because it's going to say yes when all of these are met that it's trustworthy, because all of these can be met and show you that it's not trustworthy, right? Because what we need to look at is someone operating inside of their capacity? Is Tim Houston, when he's making his 99 decisions for every 5 we're making, or when Mayor Fillmore is relying on his assumed expertise based on 100,000 hours of experience, are they forgetting their capacity? Is he forgetting that he's operating either as the Premier of Nova Scotia, the President of the province of Nova Scotia in the executive cabinet, at one time the Minister of Energy or whatever ministerial position he's holding, that Mayor Fillmore is operating in the capacity as the mayor of the HRM, which has a very defined function and a set of legislation, rules, regulations, and policies that must be adhered to continuously over time. Right now, the evidence all points to no, which means when you run this diagnostic, not trustworthy. I don't care how fast you think you can make a decision. You're not showing me that you're trustworthy, right? It's so important that we never move faster than we can stay aligned in all aspects. But if I'm looking at these men operating in their professional capacities in this way, I'm looking at them sideways going, you're probably doing this in all aspects of your life. Because how you do one thing is how you do all things. That's consistency. Continuity, which is one of our 4 conditions, continuity is always guaranteed. But again, we're going to look at it from a place of neutrality, because continuity can be yes, you're in alignment, or no, you're in a state of collapse. So what are you aligning with? Are you aligning with your governance, which in the workplace, in our institutions, laws, rules, regulations, policies, procedures, etc., which again, Tim Houston, progress over process, right? Or at an individual level, sorry if you heard that, are you aligning with your morals, your values, your ethics? Are you operating in integrity in those? Only you can answer that. But someone who is out of integrity with themselves is absolutely going to be out of integrity and out of alignment with the governance structures that they're required to work within, because they believe they don't have to. At some level, they believe they are at a status, at a structure, in a position that is above others. And I saw this offshore, right? If we're going to look at the offshore expertise that Tim Houston's relying on to make the decisions, we're talking about the jurisdictions that are shrouded in so much secrecy, with so few regulations, that the decisions that you're making quickly in those spaces absolutely do not function equitably for all. They're not designed to. So I have a lot of issues with those statements, right? And it's why I think it was just interesting that it aligned with the article that I was sent yesterday, kind of aligned with this thought that's been ruminating in my head for the past few days, which is, again, only move as fast as you can stay aligned. And for me personally, the reason it was coming up is because I have a history, of not being the most reliable person, of struggling to remain in alignment with my own ethics, morals, and integrity, being a people pleaser. And because I always functioned in this role of trying to be a people pleaser, keep the peace, make sure that everything around us is okay, and that I am that stabilizing, regulating force in a space instead of the one that's being disruptive, that leads to constant self-betrayal, right? You learn very quickly to become kind of hypervigilant, to be able to read the rooms, to understand patterns. I think it's why I read patterns so well. I understand the micro adjustments, the micro expressions. I can see kind of 10 steps ahead in terms of what may come down the pipeline based on what's happening right now. It's like I can see future consequences based on decisions that are made because of the experiences that I've had and the trauma. I hate using these words, but it's what people understand from our current models, like the childhood trauma or the social trauma that I've experienced throughout my life, right? And um, people pleasers, in my experience, people who want to keep the peace, who don't want to create too much conflict, also tend to be highly avoidant of conflict, which I also was for a very long time, which is kind of funny when you think about it now, and when you look at how I'll charge into social situations and confront things head on. I used to be very highly avoidant of conflict. And because I'm that way, I tend to have a deeper compassion and empathy towards people who do exhibit those traits, who who are struggling with similar demons, if you will, right? Because I think we all have it in one way, shape, or form. But what it allows me to do is remain in contact and in relationship with those behaviors, even though I've resolved the majority of them within myself, right? And I've really had to think about going, oh my gosh, what does this actually say about me? How much have I actually moved through these patterns and released these patterns if I'm still in a constant state of forgiveness and empathy and compassion to those who are exhibiting them towards me, right? Because at the end of the day, that creates a trust issue. It creates a trust issue because there's a lack of continuity in how someone can show up, right? When I was highly avoidant, you couldn't rely on me. I was very unreliable. I was not there continuously in the ways that I should. And it also exposed a lot of capacity issues, right? Because I was super high functioning, very reliable, too reliable at work, right? Because that's where I got the most validation. It's where I felt seen for the way I think, where I was compensated for that in certain ways, right? You get a paycheck, always undercompensated, which made me feel a certain way too. But I was constantly seeking validation from the people that I thought were of a higher status, who had titles, who looked at me more like a peer than what I felt was lower than, because I didn't hold the titles. Like, the jobs that I've had required me to have an MBA, and I'm a university dropout. I got there because I have the perception, I have the intelligence to be in that room, but because I didn't have the piece of paper, it was actively told to me that I had to work harder to maintain those positions, because I could lose it at any time by someone who was more qualified on paper, even though they may not have been able to actually walk in and fulfill that role, which actually happened a few times. But you end up, when you are that person, you tend to recognize it, because if you got it, you can spot it, right? So when you embody certain qualities, you're able to see them in other people. And then it does give you a certain level of compassion and empathy and grace. But at a certain point, it again will cause you to betray yourself if you can't be honest about why you are giving so much grace to that space. And right now, this is showing up, I would say, in all aspects of my life, right? I'm seeing it in myself. I'm seeing it in personal relationships. I'm seeing it in my family. I'm seeing it in the messaging that's coming through the news. I'm seeing it in the decisions that our city council is making right now. And at one point, you have to look at it and go, because I no longer accept it within myself. Like, once I learned how to start healing those parts of myself, to stop participating in the world from a place of avoidance, from a place of feeling constantly abandoned, from a place of betraying myself. Once I stopped accepting it within myself, well, now I have to get really honest about why I'm still accepting it in other people, and why I'm allowing that energy to influence me. Because there's still a cost to that. There's still a compensation. There's still, it creates a lack of reciprocity between people, social dynamics, institutional dynamics, government dynamics. We get into that lack of reciprocity, which means then there's going to be a price paid and someone is going to have to endure that cost. I hope this is making sense. And so another thing that came up yesterday, and I can see that Devin popped in, is that there's a development issue in a community in Nova Scotia and Lucasville, and there's development permits that are being issued to expand a community that simply doesn't have the capacity for expansion in this moment. They just don't have it, right? And I'll link the article in the show notes so that you can see it, because I first came across it yesterday on Reddit, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, we have some serious issues when it comes to how development permits are being issued in this city, right? Because what we're essentially allowing to happen is we're allowing developers to come in to communities that they're usually not a part of, that they don't have any history or roots in, to turn a profit in a space that they are not going to be stored in correctly, right? Because they're going to come in, they're going to make changes, not only physical changes to the space, cost changes. When you start increasing density, you start increasing taxes. You start potentially pricing the community out of the community that they grew up in, which means you may not have secure housing for future generations. This is how communities start to bust apart, right? We have a stewardship issue in the sense that we no longer age in place. Very rarely are the communities that you are raised in, the ones that you build a family in, the ones that your family grows in, the ones that the elderly remain in, are cared for in. That doesn't happen right now. And I've drawn parallels before because I used to work for one of the largest home care providers in Atlantic Canada, building their campuses. And they worked on an aging in place model. The idea that while you're still able and moving, you move into an apartment, which is fully functioning. And if you want a meal plan and you want some extra support and you want some housekeeping, it's available to you. You're going to pay out the ass for it, but it's there. But then as you start to decline in health, you get to move from the retirement living into the assisted living and then potentially into full nursing and ambulatory care. And at the same time, we're going to create a full community dynamic for you. You know, we're going to have game nights and we're going to have a bowling alley and we're going to have a salon. Like everything's going to be self-contained. Here is your community. Why are we building these artificially? Why are we moving our elderly out of the communities that they grew up in and lived in and moving them into these artificial communities when we don't actually have to? And it's been a question I've had for a while, only because I grew up in a multi-generational home. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a baby. She lived with us until she passed when I was 16. And she did that with her mother, and so on and so forth. I come from a family of generational caregivers where you take care of the elderly in your home. But the way our communities are being designed right now, it's just not happening. And again, that's also an inside out proposition. We have somehow been taught that the elderly are someone else's problem. And it doesn't really hit us until we become someone else's problem once we've reached that age, and by then it's too late. But what I thought was interesting in the conversation that I entered into on Reddit, when I brought up stewardship and I brought up the fact that we cannot challenge development permits once they've been settled. There's no appeal process. And if you've not, we talked last week about notice and contracts and agreement. If you don't feel like you've received sufficient notice to participate in the community meetings and you didn't have an opportunity to engage, you're not left with any options, right? And the way these institutions are choosing to communicate with us are not ideal, right? They're not operating with integrity. We have the HRM issuing us public hearing notices through disappearing messages in their Instagram stories. While yes, they are legally posted on their website in the way they're supposed to, the way they are choosing to engage the public through many other means of social media, which they had no problem using during the pandemic to tell people to stay 6 feet away, to not see your family, to mask, to vaccinate. They had no problem shoving that down your face on a regular basis during the pandemic. But when it comes to the meetings that are required to shape a community, we're going to do it really quiet. And we're not going to tell you where to find the information. And if you don't see it, oops, too bad. We have an integrity issue. But what I thought was really interesting in the Reddit comments and the Reddit feeds was that immediately people are saying, well, it's a tax issue. We have a tax issue. And these are suburban areas, rural areas that are already getting too much tax money because their current land valuation and their current property tax don't support, the infrastructure that's required, which are sidewalks, transit, ingress, egress, like all of these issues that are important to add density. Well, they don't have a tax base to support it. And this is where I want to go, hold up, what the hell do you mean there's no money? There's a lot of money in this province, in this municipality. Going back to the beginning of the conversation when I was talking about Tim Houston and Andy Fillmore and the decisions that they're making, we have continuous audit reports showing total and utter mismanagement of funds. We don't have a resource issue, we have a resource allocation issue. The money is there, but it appears more times than not, it can't be audited and tracked. We don't know how it's being spent. We don't know where it's going. But yet, just like we've been told, if you don't vote, you don't have a voice, which I absolutely disagree with. If you want nice things in your community, you have to pay more tax. That's not true. There's enough money. It's not being allocated correctly. And this is one of the reasons actually why I created Sovran Wellth. Because when we look at these resource allocation issues outside of us and can't even see that it's a resource, like people can't even see that it's a resource allocation issue. They'll look at the budget and go, where's this money being spent? And then they look at the audit where the HRM auditor says there's $380 million that we can't account for. And people are like, where did it go? We have the almost $4 billion that the Nova Scotia Auditor General said Nova Scotia Health spent without contracts in place, without following procurement guidelines. And then we still sit here and say there's no money. I don't understand that logic. I don't understand how people are still saying we need to increase taxes to get more money to be able to do these things. And in order to do that, we have to increase density, instead of looking at the fact that the money that we already have is missing on the ledger. It just needs to be reallocated. But that's because when we look at our own life and we don't see the intrinsic inherent value of our own life and where that value sits, which is why I have the 9 fields, that you have intrinsic inherent value in your physical body, in your emotional state and your ability to regulate it, in your emotional field or your intellectual field, your ability to be able to cognize what's happening around you and make sense of the world, your creative body, your ability to literally make something out of nothing, the value that sits inside of the connections and the resources that you create in community with other people. This is why we had barter systems back in the day. Your vocation, that when you can bring everything into alignment and work and put your intellectual and your creative and your connection, when you can put those and align those values and bring them into alignment, that you can actually maybe start working inside of your vocation instead of giving your precious time, attention, and energy to corporations and businesses that are sucking the life out of you. That how your environment is constructed absolutely has an impact on your physical, emotional, intellectual, creative, connective vocation. health, right? And also the energy that you bring into environments shapes that as well. That's happening bidirectionally all the time. That you do have physical material resources, things of value, whether it's your bank account, your house, stocks, bonds, like the material resources that you have, things of physical, tangible, monetary value. That's only one form of currency in all 9, right? I'm only talking about money in one particular field, one currency. And then you have your faith, the unseen belief structures that shape the health of all of these. This is your wealth. This is your intrinsic value from which your sweat equity begins to create value outside of us and shape the systems and structures that we are in all the time, right? The health of this within you is absolutely what is going to determine the health of the systems that we engage with on a regular basis, right? So when I'm talking about resource allocation, that's why I created a compass. That's why I want people to be able to see how their physical health is rippling and impacting all of these other places, how overcapacitating yourself here may create a capacity issue here, right? If you're spending all of your time in your head, intellectualizing, putting that into your work, and that's affecting your mood when you come home, and it's affecting your physical health because you're not taking care of yourself, and it's changing the way you see the world, which is then changing how you're able to value what you actually create, the talents that are allowing you to show up in this space every day. When you start assigning that value to someone else instead of yourself, we have a resource allocation issue at the human level, at the individual level. So what happens when we begin to work on this first? Allocate our capacity appropriately. Start finding the intrinsic and inherent value within ourselves, balancing this ledger appropriately. How does that change how we then participate in these systems, like the HRM, like our city planning meetings, like the way we're going to engage with developers, right? Because unfortunately, not everybody's going to do this right away. I don't think Mayor Filmer is going to sit down and go, I wonder what my sovereign wealth is. He's not going to look at this sovereign wealth. He's going to look at the national sovereign wealth, which is actually a product of this one and how it sits in every single human being. They're not going to do it, but they can absolutely be required to through the participation of the people who are. The people who are willing to be well-resourced internally, who are willing to have enough charge over their emotional state that they can operate from a space of neutrality and not show up in these spaces and be belligerent, right? We have an issue right now where 36 people have been banned from the Nova Scotia legislature because they showed up and they disrupted it during the budget meetings. And I understand why. I understand why. But unfortunately, they didn't know who they were, where they were standing. They didn't know who they were, what their function was in that space, the rules and regulations that govern the place they were standing, and they've been issued bans for it because it was easy for the people inside of that space to show up and say, you're not neutral, you're being belligerent, you've broken these rules, we're tossing you out. Did they actually feel threatened? Probably not. Did it give them an excuse to pull these out? Yeah. Have I been able to find a notice, going back to last week's, a proper notice posted on the legislature indicating exactly why they were removed and the pieces of legislature and the rules and the procedures that were broken to then issue these bans? No. Have I been able to find the notices that the 36 individuals were given that are banning them from the public house for the next 3 to 12 months? No. Can't find any of it, can't validate it, can't find an appeal process. which means, again, there's a lack of reciprocity. And the only way that that gets challenged is that the cost and the time now goes on to the people who've been issued that piece of paper, because they've not been provided, nor has the public been provided, sufficient information to justify the decision, nor a pathway to appeal it. This is the subrogation issue that we have with our systems right now, where these decisions, these 99 for every 5 decisions, these supposed 100,000 hours of experience so I can make a decision fast, the consequence of these decisions are creating enormous downstream effects that are resting on individual citizens and creating significant financial, emotional burdens all the time. The debt is being carried by the people. So the debt, if you have to go into the court system to try and mediate and appeal something that should have an inherent appeal process because it occurred in good faith, it doesn't exist. You're gonna have to go hire a lawyer, take time, learn the law, and go through a multi-month process to challenge something. We're seeing that in our development process, where the moment the city says something meets the development regulations or their codes, which we know have a lot of loopholes and gray areas, it's considered final and there's no way to appeal it. That's ridiculous. I saw it with my issue with the IWK. If you go back to, I think it's like my second or third episode, I talk about how I was harmed inside of the IWK. And even though that is a public institution that is funded by public money, that is required to carry liability insurance for such things, they will not talk to you outside of filing a claim with the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. And the insurers that are required to be licensed in this province by the Superintendent of Insurance, there is no caveat inside of the Insurance Act that requires the insurance companies must speak to you in the absence of being inside of a court. And so they use, again, all of their legal power and money to, again, put the burden back onto the person. So again, not only are you funding the health card you need to go through the front door, you're funding the hospital, you're funding the payroll for the physicians, you're funding the payroll for the lawyers, you're funding the premiums for the insurance company. And when you get hurt, you now have to take on the physical and emotional cost of what happened in that space, and then additional financial burdens to hire a lawyer to then go into a justice system that you also fund. We don't have a resource issue, we have a resource allocation issue. And this pattern shows up everywhere. It shows up everywhere 100% of the time. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And this is why participation matters immediately out of the gate, right? So if we know from, say, a development standpoint that they're going to say, once the permits are issued, they're final, that you absolutely have to make it your business to show up at these meetings. You have to know when they're happening. You have to know when to go look for them. You have to be willing to put a reminder in your phone to check on a weekly basis to see if there's going to be an important hearing that either you have to attend or you have to put a written submission in for. The time that you may spend scrolling on social media can be better served doing things like this. But also, many hands make light work, right? This is why it's important for you to find what you're passionate about and pay attention to that. Understand the ripple that it has on everything else, and then figure out how your time, attention, and energy, your participation can be focused in that area to do better and to create opportunities for there to be meaningful and sustainable change, because you have built the capacity within yourself to be able to maintain and sustain that way of life and that way of being, right? We're not avoiding conflict. We're not avoiding hard conversations. We're not avoiding standing in front of someone and speaking your truth. Because at the end of the day, you have learned how to trust yourself enough to do that. That's why I have HALT, honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust. That's why I have CLAIM, which is your capacity, jurisdiction, and contracts, so that you know who you are, where you're standing, and the contracts that bind you to them, and that you can run through HALT as you're looking at those to make sure, what am I looking at is true? Can I accept how I got here? What habits and behaviors do I need to start becoming loyal to so that I can start trusting what I'm seeing, not what they're saying? Right? Tim Houston saying, I'm going to make 99 decisions for every 5. Some aren't going to be so great. No, most of them aren't. Most of your decisions are bad. And you've repeatedly told us that you prefer progress over process. So you're not going to follow the rules. You're not making decisions based on the appropriate laws, rules, regulations, etc. And we're going to keep ending up further and further and further away from an equitable and reciprocal society, because you would rather make 99 decisions a day than halt, take a moment, and only move as fast as you can stay aligned to your capacity, the function you have sworn an oath to serve, the rules and regulations that bind you to that place continuously over time. This is why this work is important, man. Dry as hell, I get it, but important. Very, very important. And I know I sit here on camera and I talk about it and we have a lot of conversations, and I used to do this on the radio using real world events. But I also know it would be helpful for there to be a system that people can follow, right? And what I've struggled with most is that my work's not linear, right? I've said before, it's recursive. Everything is always folding back on itself. It's why, this has to sit in a compass, because everything is always going back on itself. Why this exists, the 4 conditions exist in every single one of these features. Hell, it's right here in the middle, right? Capacity, function, the ripple effect. It's why HALT sits in every single one of these. CJC sits in every single one of these. But also, when you try and explain it, it becomes cognitively heavy, right? It's cognitively heavy. And I watched a really interesting episode of Joe Rogan, maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Dr. Zach Bush was on. He's a fascinating man. And I was familiar with him, but I hadn't gone really deep into his work. And the whole episode is fascinating. And he said a lot of things that are familiar to me, and not because I've necessarily learned them from him or from other people, but because I can feel the truth of it in my bones. And you'll hear a lot of what he says reflected in what I talk about here. And the one thing that he was talking about was the power of the Egyptian hieroglyphics and sacred geometries, and that they weren't always necessarily telling us a story for us to be able to read and go back and look at, but that they were also medicinal and homeopathic in nature, that sometimes they were just there to be observed as a healing modality. And Joe was like, that's crazy. And I knew exactly what he meant, because that's why I created this. That's why the Sovran Wellth ecosystem has the words as an entry point, because we need ways to enter something. But why every word needed to have a glyph, why every glyph had to have its own color, because our primary language is nonverbal. And anyone who has read something, has seen something, and been activated by it understands it, right? We live in an emoji world. Every emoji means something to you. Do you know how many people get triggered by the thumbs up emoji? If you want to trigger someone, send them a thumbs up emoji. It is crazy. People will read it as passive aggressive. People will read it as being brushed off. It's a thumbs up. It's crazy. So that tells you that you can look at an object and fundamentally be changed by it. And I've often said that Sovran Wellth, and the reason I created it, is that it's an ecosystem of perception, right? It's an ecosystem of perception. It allows you to begin to recognize, reorganize how you perceive something, starting with yourself. And once you know what each of these glyphs are, what they mean, and what they look like when they're collapsing in your life, and what they look like when you're in alignment and they're generating value in your life, I promise you, you just need to stare at this and it becomes a mental model and your perception starts to reorganize. You just need to stare at this and you will begin to see the areas of your life and what buckets they fall into. In the same way, you can look at your phone and see a list of names and know all of the different text threads that are happening in those spaces because your perception has organized them. It's not a huge stretch. It's not a huge stretch that you can look at something. And the beautiful thing about something like this, and why I say it's homeopathic in nature, is that in homeopathy, nature heals nature. The poison is also the medicine, right? But it can only move at certain levels. It can only meet you where you're at, which means your perception is always constantly in a state of reorganization. So I woke up this morning hearing that particular clip from Zach Bush in my head, going, okay, it's time to actually create the digital storefront, if you will, where I allow these things that I talk about and show on screen and have put in my books to actually start working for people, and in the ways that they can work for you. I know earlier in my healing journey back in 2017, 2018, I started reorganizing my own perception by putting sticky notes everywhere, writing the things that I needed to remember about myself, trying to reprogram my brain. I put sticky notes everywhere, like a serial killer. I had them everywhere so that I could see certain phrases that would knock me out of whatever state that I was in. I started putting up very specific artwork that would pull me out of a specific state that I may be in. Because when I was doing interior design, I was deep in color theory. As I said earlier, I was working inside of senior care facilities. Color theory was incredibly important, specifically in the landscape of memory care. Certain colors will absolutely trigger certain psychological events in people. And so we already know that from marketing, right? We know that from market. Everything I'm talking about, you will find in all areas of your life when you're looking at logos, when you're looking at colors, when you're looking at taglines that have trained your perception to desire certain things. So why are we not using it on ourselves to learn how to train ourselves? Everybody can look at a swoosh and know that it's Nike. Everyone can look at the arches and know that it's McDonald's. And when you see like the Nike swoosh, you're gonna go sneakers, t-shirts, shorts, like you're gonna have a mental inventory of what sits inside of Nike. When you see the McDonald's arches, you're gonna have a mental inventory of that menu because you've come in contact with it enough. So what happens when you see the 9 dimensions of your life and you see physical and you immediately start doing a somatic body check where you're checking in on your heart rate and how your physical being is feeling? You're feeling tension in your body. What happens when you actually turn all of that programming that we've been conditioned to accept externally so that people can profit and extract from us on? What happens when you start actually using it for generative purposes within your own being in order to recognize your own value? Friends, it's powerful work. So I've struggled with it because it's so simple. It's so simple. And naturally, we always want to complicate things. We always want to make something more complicated than it actually is, but it is that simple. It is that simple. And it can be hard for people to kind of wrap their mind around the simplicity of it, but I'm living, walking proof that it can work. And so I'm going to start creating all of the things that I've used over my life, specifically over the last 10 years, to repair my body, to stabilize my nervous system, to build the capacities that I have now to be able to step out of avoidant behaviors, to be able to find my voice, stand in my voice, be more loyal to the truth than I am to the lies, even if it makes me look not so great and put me in a bad light for a minute, so that I can become trustworthy with myself, because I know that I am choosing to be present in the moment, aligned with my values and my ethics and my morals, and move from that space. And I think that's where we're at right now in humanity. I think that's where we're at right now in society. I think we need to get to the point where we take absolute radical self-accountability and self-responsibility for our level of awareness and how we choose to show up and participate every day. Because nothing is going to get better outside of us if we don't fix it inside of us first. And these resource allocation issues that we're seeing outside of us, whether it's government spending, cuts inside of corporations that are creating extensive burdens on us, whether it's like, I don't know, Nova Scotia Power, problematic. The constant cuts that we keep hearing about with AI, which means when you have a customer service issue, it's going to become increasingly harder for you to be able to get service that you're paying for. Like these extractive and constant extractive ways of doing business and ways of being that are just always pushing the cost back onto the individual, we have to start writing that. We have to start writing the ship. We have to start bringing reciprocity back into our everyday vernacular, right? We're not in the mode of give and take anymore. We're in offer and acceptance. What am I offering? What am I accepting? And where's the reciprocity in that? And so I did a whole podcast on that last week on the 5 elements of a contract, because that's where reciprocity lies, right? But we have to find it first inside of ourselves by understanding where our value sits, how it compounds across our life, how it generates more value, and how that ultimately shapes what it is that we have to offer the world. Because what you have to offer is ultimately the actions that you take, which is your participation, your time, attention, and energy, and how you choose to participate has the consequence, the ripple, positive or negative. There's always a consequence. There's always action. There's always something happening. So take control of it. Take charge of it from the inside out and watch everything change. Okay. We're 10 minutes over. I try to keep these to an hour. I'm hoping what I said made sense today. And I know I kind of recap every episode like this because I truly don't fully remember everything I talked about. It's kind of like I sit here and the channel opens, I guess, and whatever comes out is what's intended to come out for the day. Kind of know the topics that I touched, but I never really quite remember what I said because I don't have a script and I don't have an outline. I just have what's on my heart for the day and things that have popped up, and I start webbing them in real time on these calls. This is me, I guess, demonstrating sovereign wealth in action. What happens when you're able to start embodying this work and using it in real time to see the patterns outside of you so that you can start to reprogram the patterns inside of you and live your most sovereign and wealthy life, which is what I want for everyone at a generational level. better humans, better communities for our future generations. So yes, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. And again, if you're catching this on the replay, whether it's on Substack, YouTube, I appreciate your engagement with this content, comments, likes, subscribe, shares, all of the things, just so that it can reach the people who it's intended to reach, and nothing more, nothing less. But anyway, again, thank you for being here. Have a beautiful rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you same time, same place next Tuesday.